Hello, welcome back to Talking Europe. Well, following on from that discussion with Ukraine's ambassador to the EU, I'm joined by a guest who also comes from one of Russia's direct neighbors, Estonia, which, like Ukraine, was, of course, part of the Soviet Union, and its political elites are seen as among the most hawkish in Europe when it comes to relations with Russia. Urmas Paet was Estonia's foreign minister for many years, and he's vice president of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the European Parliament and an MEP in the centrist Renew Europe group. He joins me from Estonia today. Thank you so much, Mr. Paet, for being my guest on Talking Europe. A lot of the things that you've been calling for in Europe for many years are about making Europe's defense stronger, a more tight defense union, better cyber defenses, a European intelligence agency, all these things. Do you feel that this last year has actually speeded up any of those reforms, or is it still moving a bit slowly from your point of view?
Well, unfortunately, it's still moving slowly. Of course, there is lots more understanding after 1 year of Russian aggression against Ukraine, but still, when we speak about the self-defense capability of Europe, we still have a lot to do, and unfortunately, we don't have the level of political consensus in the European Union between member states. On this level, we should have it.
You'd like to see a real defense union with military capabilities, and the mutual defense clause, which is in the EU treaty, you would like that to be strengthened?
Short answer is yes. Of course, NATO is very important for the European security, but all added value for the European defense and security we also can get from the European Union is also very much needed. And in the frame of the European Union, of course, all this has to be strengthened, and all developments, of course, have to go hand in hand between the European Union and NATO, as of course also majority of the EU member states are also NATO members, but still there are possibilities also in the European Union how to contribute to our common defense and security.
Yes, so a lack of consensus on any major leaps forward. Let's talk about the 10th package of sanctions. Some countries, as you know, are pushing back on the European Commission's proposals for more transparency and even penalties for failing to report where frozen Russian assets are. How do you understand this pushback from some countries? Is it political, or is it really for technical reasons?
Well, I guess that the main reason still is political one, because I guess politically, but also simply from human point of view, it is simply fair that the aggressor country also has to pay for the rebuilding Ukraine. So that at the moment the damage in Ukraine is more than 700 billion euros. And it is simply fair that, yes, also partly aggressor country has to pay for it. So that's why I really actually don't understand why there are still governments and countries in Europe who are still rather skeptical. Although we have also examples from the past where the countries who started, wars later on also had to pay for this. So that in this regard, I really hope that in very foreseeable future, we still at least can get data from every and each member state what kind of Russian assets have been freezed.
With 50 MEPs or thereabouts, you signed a statement calling for frozen assets to be used to rebuild Ukraine. So you're talking about actual confiscation, which some say sets a dangerous precedent. Western companies could themselves be on the receiving end of confiscations further down the line. And another criticism is that you're basically advocating summary justice instead of due process and rule of law, which is a basic Western principle.
Well, of course, all decisions European governments are going to make, and also the European Union will make, of course, should be, legally on the safe place. And at the moment, it's important that the European Commission and also member states work very hardly to find adequate also legal framework for these steps. But I also cannot imagine that in final end, Russia will get all its money back from European countries, and mainly only the EU taxpayers have to pay for rebuilding Ukraine. And the aggressor country, will do nothing. So that in this regard, I really urge politicians in member states and also officials in the Commission to work very hard with legal basis and legal framework.
When it comes to private assets, I know you mentioned state assets, but say oligarchs, why should frozen assets of an oligarch be actually confiscated and used for reconstruction in Ukraine if there's no proven support by that oligarch for the war in Ukraine?
No, first, you cannot be an oligarch in Russia if you don't have very close and supportive relationship with the political leadership. So it is also clear that this war, this aggression against Ukraine, would not happen without clear support also from the business community, including from the oligarchs. So that the business and state and the political regime, they are in Russia so much interlinked that I guess it will be the utmost naivety to say that, oligarchs are just business people and they have nothing to do with the policy making in Russia. It's not true. Everything is linked to everything.
You've said that you have no illusions that a special tribunal could be set up through the UN. So how do you propose to do that, given that in the non-Western world, there is quite a lot of reluctance to indict Russia, and certainly opinion polls of public opinion as well in countries like India, China, Turkey show that a lot of people see Russia as a partner. So there's a lot of reluctance outside the West to go as far as you would want to go for a special tribunal.
Well, I also see that there is no other option than to start with the building, the coalition to start with the International Tribunal, because it's already more than 50,000 war crimes registered in Ukraine, and the crimes of aggression and so on and so on. So that there is no other way that the countries who have responsibility and which are normal countries, they simply cannot let it go. So that in this sense, the only way, unfortunately, yes, is to build a coalition and also, of course, convince third countries. Because if you look, for example, at the sanctions, then there are also countries who basically joined with sanctions against Russia and which are not only EU and NATO members. And I guess that there are many, many countries in the world who are very much worried what actually is going on. And they also don't like the situation where international law has, no role to play anymore.
Well, obviously there are countries that supported sanctions, but they might be more skeptical about actually trying to prosecute someone that they still see as a partner, i.e. the Russian government. But nonetheless, let's put that to one side. I want to ask you about a couple of things about Estonia, if I may. The Estonian intelligence service said in its annual report that Russia is capable of exerting credible military pressure in the Baltic region. Do you know what evidence that is based on, and how do you see that report in the context of the upcoming elections in Estonia?
Now, first, it has nothing to do with our upcoming national elections. But of course, the situation is that although Russia has very costly aggression against Ukraine, but unfortunately, Russia has still enough capabilities also increase the pressure against other third countries. We see it, for example, at the moment in Moldova already, where the pressure against Moldovan government has been increased. If we look, for example, Arctic Russia, then big part of their military presence, which used to be there before, is still there, including nuclear submarines, for example. So that, yes, the truth is that unfortunately Russia still has also the power to, if they want, to create troubles also in other
But
parts
you,
of the world.
right, but you're not talking about a specific threat that you're aware of when it comes to Estonia.
No, it's not specific, because Russians also know very well that Estonia is member of the NATO, member of the EU, and it automatically, of course, means that if something happens, then it's a direct conflict with all NATO member states.
And on the Estonian election, obviously authorities must be very mindful of the cybersecurity environment. Could you share anything with us about preparations for the elections with that context in mind?
Of course, cybersecurity is absolutely important, because there is no conflict in the world these days where there would not be also part of cyber conflict. And actually, during also last year, I guess many countries in Europe, including Estonia, we witnessed lots of cyber attacks also from Russian side. So that, yes, this is the situation, and we are very much aware of it. Especially, as you know, in Estonia, we also have so-called e-voting, electronic voting. And that's why, of course, the security of our IT systems is absolutely important.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us on the program, Urmas Paet, former Foreign Minister of Estonia. And that's all we have time for this edition of Talking Europe. Thanks for watching, and see you again soon.